Stuck inside these four walls, sent inside forever, never seeing no one nice again like you, mama, you.
Greetings, YouTube. This is Chris Scott, and I want to welcome you back to Chris Scott TV and for the second installment of Chris's Corner, the newest feature on the Chris Scott YouTube channel. I want to first and foremost welcome all my returning subscribers, and if you are a first-time viewer and you enjoy the content, please at the end of this video hit the subscribe button and turn all your friends onto it because they may enjoy it as well. I want to welcome you back into the confines of my home studio, the Music Lair, located in the house that I live in beautiful Kannapolis, North Carolina. And today I am going to be discussing with you what I consider to be my top 5 most influential classic rock albums of all time. Now, the decade I grew up in, the 1970s, in my opinion, produced some of the most memorable and some of the most iconic music ever created. And with that being said, I could probably go on for 8 to 10 hours discussing albums and music that I listened to, that I love and still love today, that influenced me the most in my early developmental stage of my passion for music. But I think after careful deliberation, what I have selected for my top 5 and for the honorable mentions that I'll also include, I think they give a fair and accurate representation of the music and the albums that impacted and were instrumental in my musical development. So again, I want to thank all of you who subscribe to this channel for returning, and for you new viewers, I ask that at the end of the video, if you like it, that you will hit that subscribe button. And now, without any further delay, let's get at it. This is Chris Scott's top 5 most influential classic rock albums of all time. Enjoy.
I'm a man of my word. Love, love, can't you feel your heartbeat? Love, love, I can feel your heartbeat.
Alright, coming in at number 5, and in my opinion, what could have very easily come in at number 1 because it was absolutely instrumental in beginning my love affair with music. And after hearing this album, it just, it just grew and grew. But the Partridge Family, first album, in September of '70, the Partridge Family series first came on, and it ran for 4 seasons until July of 1974. But I can remember first seeing that show and falling madly in love with Laurie Partridge. And I at first used to pretend that I was Danny Partridge and just so I could be Laurie Partridge's brother. But the music was just phenomenal. I guess you would say bubblegum by today's standards. It's very poppy. But this particular album, the whole album is just killer. 11 songs. Little did I know at the time that nobody in the Partridge Family outside of David Cassidy and Shirley Jones actually performed, during the show or on any of the records, but they did. David Cassidy was a fine musician. I didn't follow his solo work, but I know he was a heartthrob to many. But little did I know that none of them played, their actual instruments at the time because I was so young. But later in life, come to find out that the band that actually played on the album were some of LA's finest studio musicians at the time. They were called the Wrecking Crew, and just to name a few of them, you had Hal Blaine on drums, you had Mike Melvoin on keyboards, and Larry Knechtel, who would go on to play with Bread later on. You had Joe Osborne and Max Bennett playing bass, Louis Shelton, Dennis Budimir, and Tommy Tedesco playing guitar. And the music was very catchy. I fell in love with it. I can remember my mom bought this album. I guess she bought it for all of us because we all watched the Partridge Family when we were young. And this album played continuously in the household, and have such fond memories about it. There's not a weak song on the entire album. Some of my favorite cuts are Brand New Me, Bandela. I Can Hear Your Heartbeat was probably my favorite. I'm on the Road. And probably two of the biggest that they released, I Think I Love You and Somebody Wants to Love You. The album was released in October of 1970 on Bell Records. Just a phenomenal album. And again, when I look back at it today, and I still listen to it today, when I look back at it, there were such fond memories associated with this album. And had it not been seeing that show, hearing the music, and developing an early love for music at the time, I don't know that my music career that would come later in life would go the direction that it did. But yeah, number 5 and easily number 1, Partridge Family album. A great recording. You can get it on CD, which I do have it on CD, but I also have the the classic vinyl. And but yeah, great album. And if you're a fan of the Partridge Family, it's out there, and go pick you up a copy. So that's number 5 on my list. And at number 4 on my list, probably one of my all-time favorite albums to this date by this artist, and that is Alice Cooper. And this is his March 1975 release, Welcome to My Nightmare. 11-song album, produced by legendary rock producer Bob Ezrin, who went on to produce records for Kiss and Pink Floyd. I was first introduced to this album when it came out by my oldest sister's then boyfriend. I can remember him coming to the house one day and putting the record on my mom's console stereo system, and the very first song he played was The Black Widow. And that song had such a groove to it. I remember that immediately catching my attention. And then when I perused the album cover, I was also struck by the Black Widow spider that is so prominently displayed on the back cover. Well, that scared me to death. So I think I started listening to this album more out of fear than anything else. But again, this album, there's not a weak song on it. I could pick all 11 of these songs could be favorite songs of mine, but if I was going to pick, several of the ones that probably had the most meaning and had the most impact for me, I would have to say Devil's Food, The Black Widow, Only Women Bleed. Only Women Bleed was a huge top 40 commercial success for Alice off of this album. And I will go so far as to say that this album was probably Alice's biggest commercial success of the 1970s, if not his entire career. Department of Youth, Cold Ethel years ago, and in one of my all-time favorites is Steven. Every song on this album, when I look back at it, had atmosphere to it, whether it was the scary, creepy vibe of The Black Widow or the vaudeville flavor of Some Folks, the hauntingly enchanting Only Women Bleed, and then years ago in Steven, which both of those songs, Steven, years ago ran into Steven. Both of those songs just had an atmosphere to it that I can't explain, but I just remember it so vividly and loving it so much. But fantastic album again. If you're an Alice Cooper fan and you don't have this album, there's something seriously wrong with you. You might want to check your pulse and make sure you're still breathing in this world. Yeah, that's number 4, and still listen to that today, and one of my favorite recordings of all time.
I used to smoke my brains out, fly to the sky. I used to love to freak out, didn't wonder why. I knew the storm was rolling, and I drove too. I didn't care what I was doing, as long as I was with you. I was blown, and that's what you are now. I was blown, didn't care why I had. I was blown, and just scream. I was blown, right inside a dream.
And coming in at number 4, one of my favorite groups of the 70s, and that's Canada's Bachman Turner Overdrive. And yes, it is pronounced Bachman, and I heard this from an interview I heard with Randy Bachman a while back, and he stated that was how you said it. It wasn't Bachman. But I was guilty of saying Bachman back then, but out of respect for Randy, I'll pronounce his name right. But yes, Bachman Turner Overdrive 2, released in December of 1973. Magnificent album. My first introduction to it, again, as with my introduction to most music back then, was through one of my sister's boyfriends. And this was one of my younger sister's boyfriends who turned me on to this album. I can remember he used to pull into the driveway in his 1970 Barracuda with 8-track tape blaring, and I heard him playing this album. So he would let me sit in his car and pretend like I was driving and listen to the Bachman Turner tape. And later, he would even pay me $0.25 to do it, so he could sit in the swing, the front porch swing, along with my sister. So it ended up being lucrative in several ways for me. But yeah, this album, one of my all-time favorite recordings. It was produced by Randy Bachman. It's an 8-song album, which I guess by today's standards would be an EP. Not that many songs on it, but every track that's on it is just a killer tune. The album also featured the last appearance of Randy's brother Tim Bachman, who would leave the band after the recording of Bachman Turner 2 and be replaced the following year for the next album by Blair Thornton, who went on to do a fantastic job with them as well. But this album actually produced Bachman Turner's biggest commercial success hits in this country, which was Let It Ride. And it peaked at number 12 on the Billboard charts in 1973. And then the following year in 1974, Taking Care of Business peaked at number 12 on the Billboard charts and was a huge commercial success for them. But yeah, this album has so many memories attached to it that are just, you know, fantastic memories. My mom bought this album for me my birthday that year of 1973, and just thinking about that, you know, brings a smile to my face. She always looked after my music interests back then. But as far as favorite songs on this album, the whole album's killer. I can name every song. Each one of them would be a favorite song. But if I was going to pick a favorite song, I would have to say Blown, Let It Ride, Taking Care of Business, Tramp, Give It Time. And then one of my favorites also was the track Welcome Home. Welcome Home, if you've never heard it, really shows off the what I consider to be the underrated skill level of C.F. Turner's bass playing. He's just a phenomenal bass player. And that song in particular, he has a section toward the end that is all jazz. And it is one of the most amazing things that I've ever heard. But yeah, this is a great album. I highly suggest getting it if you're a Bachman Turner Overdrive fan. I have the CD and I have the classic vinyl, and great recording and great memories associated with it. And that's my pick for the number 3 slot. All right, now we have the number 2 selection on my list. This self-titled release by the Beatles in 1968 is probably, without a doubt, my favorite Beatle album of all time. It was released on November the 22nd of 1968, just a day after my 3rd birthday. It was produced by George Martin, 30-song double album. Just a great album all the way around. And even though the album itself is titled The Beatles, it's widely accepted that this was the least liked group effort by the Beatles up to that point. Stresses and tensions within the band, I believe, had begun to really assert themselves, especially after their coming back from their long stay in Rishikesh, northern India, where they were studying transcendental meditation with the Maharishi Mahesh Yogi. After they returned was when they started recording this album. Yoko Ono had come on the scene and began showing up at the recording sessions, throwing extra tension into the mix. And I believe George Harrison in particularly was getting annoyed with his allotment of just 3 to 4 songs on an album, because Lennon and McCartney were the chief songwriters. But this album is just fantastic. Even though it's not exactly a group effort, there's not a weak track on the entire album. Every song is just killer. I can remember listening to this album on the turntable night after night through the headphones, and just listening to every sound and listening to every tone. And I won't even try to get into what track off of this album is my favorite, but I will say that songs like Revolution 1, Everybody's Got Something to Hide Except Me and My Monkey, Your Blues, Helter Skelter, all of those songs were instrumental in me gravitating to heavier rock. And I feel certain that it's from that influence that when the new wave of British heavy metal finally hit the scene in the early 80s, that I gravitated to that. But yeah, number 2 on the list, It probably could have been number one, and it was a struggle between this one and the number one selection, but I'm comfortable in putting it at that spot, and still an album that I love to this day and listen to all the time. Just a great album, and yeah, that is Chris's number two selection.
Well, come on now. Ooh, yeah, 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 yeah. Ooh. Well, come on now. Ooh, yeah, 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 yeah. Well, Jets. Jets.
And now we have arrived at Chris Scott's number one most influential classic rock album. And if you have paid any attention to the intro to this video, it's going to come as no shock to you that that album is Paul McCartney's 1976 triple live album, Wings Over America. The album was produced by Paul McCartney, and it was recorded during the American leg of McCartney's hugely successful world tour that began on July the 23rd at Southampton, England's Gaumont Theatre, and then culminated in its climactic finale after 3 sold-out shows at the LA Forum. I remember reading in an interview with Paul McCartney after this tour concluded that the entire band sat down and went through over 800 hours of tape, trying to come up with the best representations of the 30-song set that they played night in and night out on that world tour. And what they came up with is just fantastic. Again, there's no way in the world I'll attempt to try and give you a favorite song off this album, because every song is killer. The production on every song is killer. There's not a weak song on the entire album. And to me, it's probably one of the best live recordings I've ever heard. Production-wise, musicianship-wise, it's just stellar. The lineup for McCartney's band back then was you had Paul McCartney, you had Denny Lane on lead and rhythm guitars, you had Jimmy McCulloch on lead and rhythm guitars, you had Joe English playing drums, Paul's wife Linda playing keyboards, and he took a horn section with him as well, which consisted of 4 different horn players. But I remember being first introduced to this album by one of my sister's boyfriends who brought it over one night. And I sat in the rocking chair in front of the console stereo, listening to the album and marveling at this photo. And every time I see this photo, I get goosebumps on both arms, because this was what it was all about. This is what motivated me to want to play music live, to be any one of those individuals and play music live on stage. That was my dream. That was my goal. And it was definitely instrumental in me wanting to pick up the bass and play bass. Paul McCartney is such a great bass player, very underrated bass player. But if you told me that you were going to put me on a deserted island and that before I went I could take one album with me to listen to for the remainder of my life, Wings Over America would be that album. There's probably not a day that goes by that I don't listen to one or two recordings off of this album. It's just, it impacted my life so much musically, and there's so many great memories associated with each one of these songs. Takes me back to a simpler and a easier time in life, unlike what's in the world that we live in today. If I want to go back and just be spellbound again, all I have to do is put on side one and go from there. So yeah, that's my number one album, and there you have my top 5 most influential classic rock albums of all time. I want to thank you for taking this trip down memory lane with me, and I hope that maybe some of this music, some of these albums might have struck a chord with you. May have, maybe one or two of them might have been, had a big impact on your life as well. And if it did, I'm glad I was able to take you, down that trip. But anyway, if you enjoyed what you saw here, then I really encourage you to hit that subscribe button and turn your friends on to it. And I'm so glad we had this time together just to share a laugh and sing a song. And it seems we just get started, and before you know it, comes the time we have to say, so long. Chris Scott, as always, peace and God bless.
Mm-hmm.